Jaya Srimad Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharmarashtra Jayate. Suryavansha Jayate. Victory to Sanatana Dharma. Victory to the Dharma nation. Victory to the solar dynasty of true kings and queens and rulers of our universe. Evam bhavattu. May it be so. Namaste, everyone. It is absolutely my pleasure to be here with you this evening, what is evening for me here in Omaha, Nebraska, and what will be various times for different people throughout the world, because indeed we have an international audience of people all throughout the globe who join us every Monday for these live stream satsanghas. What we're going to be talking about today is something very special. For those of you who have seen my previous videos, you know that we have one video consisting of a talk that I gave several years ago that was called The Heart of the Bhagavad Gita. And it involved what is called the Chatur-shloki, that is the four most important verses of Bhagavad Gita that form the heart, the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Well, in the same way, while some people may know about those four verses and how they're quite well known, in the same way, there are four verses that are considered to be the heart of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is something people know about a little bit less, actually. Indeed, very few people know about this. Even though, indeed, in the same way that the Chatur-shloki of the Bhagavad Gita are extremely important, because in understanding those four verses, you essentially understand what is the totality of the actual teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Well, in the same way, when you understand these four verses that we're going to go over this evening, this Chatur-Shloki-Bhagavata, it's called, you understand truly the essence of what is being explained to us in the totality of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And before I go into the talk, actually, before I examine these verses with you, first I just want to talk about this a little bit deeper and about what is the actual nature of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Why it is that the Srimad Bhagavatam is considered to be of such vast importance within the scope of the totality of the Vedic scriptures. Because as we know, you've heard me say this many times, and you can very easily confirm this for yourself, there are many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of various texts and scriptures in what is called the Vedic literature or the Vedic scriptures. And of all those, while they are all of importance, there are several that stand out in that they are considered to be of extreme importance and or they provide an important summary of the totality of the teachings of Sanatana Dharma. Well, when it comes to the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Srimad Bhagavatam is indeed one of these extremely important scriptures. And the reason why is because it is Vyasa Deva's auto-commentary upon his own work known as the Brahma Sutras. Now, let me unpack that a little bit for people who may be unfamiliar with these terms. There is an extremely important philosophical text. Indeed, it's the most important philosophical text within Sanatana Dharma, known as the Brahma Sutras, sometimes known as the Vedanta Sutras. And it is this text that forms the basis of what is called Vedanta philosophy. That is that which is the very culmination of wisdom, that which is the culmination of the teachings of Sanatana Dharma and the totality of the Vedic scriptures. So this one book is known as the Brahma Sutras. Brahma meaning Brahman, meaning God. These are sutras to understand God. Now, all that being said, because this work is of such vast importance, there have been many, actually hundreds of commentaries on the Brahma Sutras. A few people who are very conversant with Vedic philosophy will maybe be able to mention the most important, let's say 2 or 3 commentaries. Truthfully, there have been hundreds, many of which are lost to history. But interestingly, the very first commentary upon the Brahma Sutras was written by the very author of the Brahma Sutras, Vyasadeva, Veda Vyasa, he's also known as. He wrote a commentary on his own book. And that commentary is known by us today as Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavata Purana. This is described in the Bhagavata Purana itself. This is described in other Puranas describing the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana, etc. Now, why is all this of importance? The reason why this is of importance is because one of the primary purposes of the Srimad Bhagavatam is indeed to unfold what is this philosophy known as Vedanta. That's one of the most important reasons for why the Srimad Bhagavatam was even written. Now, with all that as a background understanding, now we come to this and these 4 verses. The reason why this is called the Chatur-Shloki-Bhagavata, why these are the 4 most important verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, is because these 4 verses explain perfectly what is the essence of, indeed, Vedanta in accordance with the teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's what these 4 verses do. So thus, indeed, these 4 verses are highly philosophical. And more, they're not just philosophical, but very clearly, and indeed if you look especially at the Sanskrit, but again, a good translation, and we have a good translation here. This is Prabhupada's translation. So when you look at this, at the Sanskrit, and indeed a very good translation, what you see is that what the Srimad Bhagavatam is saying that the teachings of Vedanta is Vishishta Advaita, what is called Vishishta Advaita. And you don't have to take my word for this. We know that there are, again, many hundreds, really. Historically, there have been hundreds of different schools and ideas about what is Vedanta, down to this day, down to New Age fools trying to comment on Vedanta, not knowing what they're talking about. We have had many different opinions about what is Vedanta. But again, how do we know what is the actual teaching of the author of a book? See what that author says his teachings are. So again, this is why in the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is Vyasa's commentary on his own work. And more, what he describes in these 4 verses, if anyone out there understands even the main schools of Vedanta, so Advaita, Dvaita, Vishishta Advaita, let's just stick with those. Those are the most well-known ones. What you will see described in these 4 verses is indeed Vishishta Advaita, that is the teachings of Ramanuja Acharya. That's what you're going to see here. So indeed, these 4 verses are very important. So all that being said, let us dive into these 4 verses. So these are all in the 2nd canto, all chapter 9, and these are successive verses. These are verses that all flow in a row. So we are beginning with Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse 33. And this is Vishnu himself speaking to Brahmā. And that becomes very obvious within the context of these 4 verses themselves. But again, just to let you know, this is not just anyone speaking to anyone. This is Lord Vishnu very specifically speaking to Brahmā. And Brahmā is the demiurge, the creator god, the God who is responsible for creating our material universe. So in this verse he says, Brahmā, it is I, Lord Narayana, who was existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself. Nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, Narayana. And after annihilation, what remains will also be I, Lord Narayana. Amazing verse, powerful verse, a verse which, again, like so many verses in the Vedic scriptures, one can be tempted to just quickly read and then go on to the next verse. But let me tell you, we're not going to do this. But truthfully, if we wanted to, we could comment on this verse for 5 hours. Just this one verse. That's how important are the teachings of this verse. So first of all, again, this is crucial. This is very crucial, actually. This is not just ex-New Age person on YouTube commenting on the nature of God. This is not just ex-theologian commenting on the nature of God. This is not your friend Hal down the street commenting on the nature of God. This is God commenting on the nature of God. And think of the implications of this. Think of the epistemological implications of this. I use that word a lot, epistemology. Think of what it means to derive knowledge about God, not just from anyone, not just from any source, but from the primary source, the most primary of primary sources, God himself. So this is God himself explaining what is his nature. And explaining this not just to anyone, but indeed someone who is quite important, Brahmā, who, he was just powerful enough to create a universe. So these are the two individuals having this discussion. So first of all, Narayana, Vishnu, he is speaking of himself, and he says, "It is I who was existing before creation." Now let's stop here. Two things. First of all, he is saying this to Brahmā very specifically, because indeed Brahmā is responsible for creation. So he's making this quite personal. He's explaining to this demigod, very, very important demigod, but a demigod nonetheless, that, you're the creator of this universe. Yes, I existed before creation. So first of all, he's making it very clear to Brahmā who he is, what is the exalted state of his nature. That's the first thing. Second thing that he is saying is he is giving an explanation of one of his attributive features. That is one of his own, of God's attributive features. And what is that? That God is indeed that primary being who, before there is anything, there is God. Before there is materiality, there is God. Before there is creation, there is God. Before there is us even, there is God. Before there is quite literally anything, there is God. So this is a very important thing that Vishnu is saying here, that it is he who was existing before creation, and then he makes it even more clear with the second clause. When there was nothing but myself. So, Lord Vishnu is indeed the source of all reality. And when you trace back all of reality in this causal chain until you get to, again, that first cause of all things, that which is the karana karanam, that which is the cause of all things, which itself has no cause, what you see is that of necessity, at that time, if you could even call it that, in that ontological state of God in and of himself, there is nothing else in existence. So God is indeed all and all. So this is what's being said here. So this is pointing to many things, including the unitary nature of God, including the fact that God is indeed one, including the fact that before, again, there was anything, there was God. What does this mean? That God serves as the foundational building blocks of all that which proceeds God, of all that which comes from God. So now, of course, we see diversity. We see God. We see God's energies. We see all the manifestations of those energies in accordance with whether we're talking about sentient or insentient energies. We see ourselves. We see living beings around us. We see the multiplicity, all the things of this world that we see around us. But at one time, there was God, and only God. So thus, God is the source of all things, and God is a unitary being. Now, let's go on. nor was there the material nature, prakriti, nor was there the material nature. Very good. The cause of this creation. I'll speak about both of these clauses at once, because the second clause doesn't add too much. It's just explaining what is prakriti, what is material nature, which I'm going to explain to you now anyway. So what Lord Vishnu is saying here is that he precedes even material nature. Material nature is one of the Shaktis, it's one of the powers, one of the energies of God. It is known as Prakriti, and Prakriti is understood to be one of those elements that in and of itself is eternal. There are only a few elements that are eternal. Consciousness is eternal. Prakriti is eternal. Many of the Shaktis of God are eternal. Time is eternal. Truth is eternal. The attributes of God are eternal, etc. When we understand that, then we understand the full implication of what God is saying here. That he existed before even eternal Prakriti. Prakriti is eternal. You see, he could say this about any of these eternal things. He could say this about time. Time is understood in Vedic physics to actually be an eternal constant. It's something that can be changed, but it is eternal. There's always time within the material realm. God existed even before eternal time. God existed even before Prakriti. God exists before all things. So thus he says here, nor was there material nature the cause of this creation when God was here. So God precedes even those elements of reality that are eternal. Think of what that means. God is the eternal of eternals. And he proceeds. That which you see now is also I, Narayana. Let's stop there. So of course, by what you see now, what is being spoken of quite literally is that which is perceptual, that which Brahmā, and really by extension we who are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, everything that we see now, everything that we perceive around us, i.e. materiality, everything that we see, all the colors, all the sights, all the sounds, everything that enters through our senses, all the solidity, all the energies, the material energies of this world, and on and on and on, all of these things that we see now also, these things also Narayana precedes. So that which you see now is also I, Narayana. So these things also come from God, God being the source of all things. And now he continues. And after annihilation, what remains will also be I, Lord Narayana. So indeed, Narayana, God, is that constant. If we were to speak either philosophically or even in terms of philosophical physics, I have to say, not material physics alone, but philosophical physics. If we were to speak about that one thing that is that one universal and transuniversal constant that is here, to the point where no other, even eternal thing, what to speak of temporary thing, can even compare to that constant. That is God and God alone. That's what he's saying. He was here before creation. He will be here after the annihilation of this world. So that is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse 33. With that, let's go on to the next verse. As I mentioned, we could go much deeper into all of these verses, but we have 4 verses to look at. And I want to keep track of the time because I'd like to have some time for questions and answers. Now we'll go to the next verse, which is Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse 34. And Lord Vishnu continues to speak to Brahmā. O Brahmā, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, has no reality. Know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. Very nice. So Lord Vishnu is speaking about several things here. And again, due to time, I don't have time to talk about all of them. I'll talk about several of the more important things that he's saying here. First of all, whatever appears to be of any value. Now he is talking about not merely the material world in and of itself, i.e. insentiency in and of itself, but what he's talking about here is what appears in our perception to be of value in accordance with how deep our illusion is. So whatever appears to be of any value, what is of value to people? Different things in accordance to who we are. What's of value to people? Well, money, possessions of every kind, fame, fortune, pleasure, etc., etc. Anything that we can think of that is of value to us in our illusory state. So what he is saying here now is whatever appears to be of any value to we who are within this world, if that thing that we think is of value is without relation to me, it has no reality. So in other words, what he is doing now is showing this juxtaposition between that which is ultimate real and that which is the illusion of reality. So this is what he's talking about here. Again, this dichotomy of two things. That there is he himself, that is God, who is indeed everything, as was explained in the previous verse. Because God precedes all things. God is the source, the origin of all things. God is that thing of ultimate true value, but now he's talking about that value. And he's saying that he himself is the thing that is of value. And whatever appears to be of value to us, we can acquire these things. What do you want? What do you want? Do you want a new car? Do you want a wonderful house? What do you want? Do you want money, fame? Again, any of these things that you can think of. And when we have these things of value, if we don't also have God, what we really are doing is simply giving in to illusion. It is God himself that gives value to all things, and without whom we can have everything in creation. We can have literally creation itself, but if we do not have God, we have literally nothing. What do we have in front of us? We have an illusion. It's kind of like me telling you, oh, I'm going to give you $1 billion. Hold on. Here you go. And I give you a piece of paper where I wrote $1 billion. Valueless. It says $1 billion on it, but I just wrote it a second ago and it has zero value. So this is what it's like when we even acquire the things that we think that we want in our illusion, but God not being present, those things that seem to be of value are just as valueless. Very good. Now with that, let's go on just a little bit more to the rest of this verse. Know it, and that is again, all those things that we think are of value, but are really not if they're not related to God. So this is what he means by it. Know it as my illusory energy. So indeed, this is the nature of illusion. This is the nature of illusion. And illusion is the most powerful thing in the universe vis-a-vis those individuals who have chosen not to be with God. When we choose not to be with God, when we choose to serve ourselves rather than serve God, when we choose to explore the illusion of who we are rather than the reality of who we are, etc. When that is the case, then what we are doing is we are choosing Maya. We are choosing to put ourselves in the sector of reality where we will be exploring that which is not that which is. And what is he saying here? He is saying, know it, that is, all of these things we think, material things that we think are of value, know it as my illusory energy. In other words, it's illusion. It's Maya. It's something that's not real. It may seem very real, but it's not. We have people who will vie for kingdoms. You know, it's interesting. This is just as an aside. I love history. I read history. I read all about history. I watch documentaries about history, etc., etc. And it's always fascinating. I've read so many stories like this to the point where it's lost a lot of its fascination to me. Reading about kings, great generals throughout history, Roman times, Greek times, all throughout medieval Europe, ancient China, on and on and on. You have all these supposedly great individuals who will vie for power, and their military strategies and how they'll bring their 10,000, 100,000 soldiers to the front line and the strategies that they do, etc., etc., etc. And where are every single one of these great so-called great kings and generals of the past? Dead. dead, and everything lost. Everything lost. This is the nature of illusion. That when we are here and we think that we're vying for power in this world, and we do everything in our power to gain wealth and fame and land, etc., etc., it's kind of like a virtual reality game. It's like a virtual reality game where you're convinced that what's happening in front of you is 100% real until somebody comes and rips off that little thing that's on your eyes, and you realize, oh, what happened? Where's my kingdom? It was an illusion. Well, in the same way, it's an illusion within the material context as well, within the context of this empirical realm. It's an illusion. And when we do not understand the nature of the illusion and we pursue the illusion nonetheless, that's what gives us misery. So, know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. Now, this last clause of this verse is very interesting. So his illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. So several things can be said about this. First of all, everything that we experience, not quite everything, but the basic elements of what we experience within this material world, has been described in the Vedic scriptures themselves, indeed in the Bhagavad Gita, in several places in the Srimad Bhagavatam, including here, but other places as well. It's been described by great acharyas and true gurus of the past that the basic elements that we experience in this material world are really an upside-down, warped reflection of what is reality. It's not actual reality, but it's kind of a reflection. It's similar to the idea of me, the person, but then if there are lights on me, you look behind me and you see my shadow. Well, the shadow is connected to me. The shadow, you can see it. You can see it, but it's just a reflection of me. It's just something that is a byproduct of me that really has no reality. Well, in the same way, this is what is being said here, that the things that appear within this world that we take so seriously are just like a shadow. Rather than the shadow, look to the person. You want to speak to me? Don't be silly and talk to my shadow. I'm right here. You can talk to my shadow. My shadow's not going to respond. In fact, I'll hear you talking to my shadow behind me, and I'm not going to respond because I'll just think there's something wrong with you. Well, in the same way, when we engross ourselves in the pleasures of this material world, in, again, the wealth and the fame, etc., the pleasures of this material world, it's like we are playing with the shadow. It's like we are speaking to and interacting with a reflection in a mirror instead of the actual person. The actual person is God, and that is the person who we are indeed to know. Very good. So with that, let's go on. And again, just due to time, I'm going to curtail my full commentary on these verses just a little bit. But I hope that people are getting the gist of what is being said in these four actually very Vedantic verses. And it continues, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, and now verse 35. And again, Vishnu is speaking to Lord Brahma. O Brahma, please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. Similarly, I myself also exist within everything created, and at the same time, I am outside of everything. So again, very nice, very important, very Vedantic verse. This is a very Vedantic verse in which we are speaking about the elements of reality and God's interpenetration of those various elements of reality. That in a nutshell is what Vedanta explores. So let's look at this. First, Lord Vishnu says to Brahma, please know that the universal elements, and first of all, what are these universal elements? Most of the ancient cultures are in agreement with these elements. There are 5 elements. These are earth, water, fire, air, and ether, in accordance with, again, Vedic philosophy. Much of the ancient world agrees with these. Sometimes some cultures will leave out ether, and they'll just have the first 4. In the case of China, I believe, they also include metal, But other than a few little differences like that, there's basic agreement among all ancient civilizations that these 5 elements are the basic building blocks of material reality. So all that being said, just so you have a little background, you understand what he's talking about as far as the universal elements. Again, let's look at this again. Please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. He's using this merely as an example, but let me explain what he means by this very specifically. The material elements have their basis in Prakriti itself. This being the case, the elements actually exist pre-creation. Before there's even a cosmos, there are indeed the elements in seed form in Prakriti itself. The same can be said about the gunas as well. So that being the case, the elements are used as the building blocks of material reality once a universe is created, but at the same time, it's not that they quite literally come here. The elements also pre-exist creation as, again, building blocks that are there within Prakriti or materiality, material energy itself. So that's what he is saying here, and he's saying this just to give a very basic example of how he also is both transcendent and immanent in all things. So now, having understood this clause, let's go to what is actually the important part of this verse. And he says here, similarly, so in a similar sort of way, I myself also exist within everything created. And let's stop there. What, of course, is being expressed here, what's being explained here, is what, to use the technical, theological / philosophical term, is called panentheism. Not pantheism, panentheism. This is something which it's fascinating how we've looked at so many dozens and dozens and dozens of verses so far within the totality of the Vedic scriptures, in which this concept of panentheism is explained again and again and again and again. And yet, interestingly, it was not until a very special book came out called Sanatana Dharma, the Eternal Natural Way, that it was actually explained for the first time for a modern audience that panentheism is indeed the teaching, the theological teaching of Sanatana Dharma, period. Not pantheism, not monism, not any other ism, but rather panentheism. Now, what is meant by panentheism? Well, what's meant by it is exactly what Vishnu is saying here. But let me give you the definition. The idea of panentheism is that God is a being who, on the one hand, transcends all things, is radically transcendent, while simultaneously being immanent also in all things. In other words, God himself is never touched by anything lesser than God. He is not touched by illusion. He is not touched by materiality, etc. He is supremely transcendent on the one hand. On the other hand, he also is present within everything that exists. And this is the miracle of God, that he fully transcends reality and he also interpenetrates all of reality with his presence. Simultaneously, that is known as panentheism. This is exactly what Lord Vishnu is describing in this clause now. So now with that understanding, let's look at this clause. He says, similarly, I myself also exist within everything created. So again, he interpenetrates all of reality. There is nothing that exists in which God is not present, but now he continues. And at the same time, I am outside of everything. And this is pointing to, again, the transcendent nature of God, that he is within all things, but he also transcends all things at the same time. Indeed, if you have even the slightest inkling of divine ontology and true theology, you understand that you could not have one without the other. The only way that God can interpenetrate all reality is if he is a being who is so great that he transcends all. And more, if he is a being who is so great that he transcends all, then to interpenetrate all of reality is nothing for him. So we see how these two go together perfectly. So thus panentheism. We, followers of Sanatana Dharma, are panentheists. We believe, as Lord Vishnu himself is stating here, that God is the ultimate transcendent while at the same time immanent in all things. Very good. Now, with all that, we have one more verse to go through. And this is Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse 36 of Srimad Bhagavatam. And it proceeds in this way. A person who is searching after the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, must certainly search for it up to this, in all circumstances, in all space and time, and both directly and indirectly. Very good. And thus ends this verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now let's discuss this a little bit. First of all, Lord Vishnu here now is describing an individual who is in illusion, but who is a sincere seeker. As are many of you who are now listening to me, quite literally right now, live, and will see the video later. Many people will see the video later. If a person is indeed a sincere seeker, they understand what it is that they're seeking. If a person is a philosophical/spiritual seeker, what is it that they're seeking? Well, if they are 100% sincere and honest, if they are wise, as I always say, they're seeking the highest. They're not just seeking mystic powers for themselves, and not just seeking, how can I do astral travel? How can I channel things, etc., etc. No, a serious spiritual person, someone to be taken seriously, an adult spiritual seeker, is seeking God, is seeking the highest, is seeking that which is the source of everything, which, when you know that, you know everything. When you have that, you have everything. That's what we're seeking. So now, understanding that, let's look at this. A person who is indeed a seeker, who is searching after the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, must certainly search for it up to this. Now, that's a strange construction, but I looked at the Sanskrit, and it's a good translation. Again, this is Prabhupada's translation of this. What is meant by this is it's not as obscure as you would think. All that Vishnu is saying here is that indeed a person who is searching after the supreme absolute truth must search for it up to that supreme absolute truth. In other words, what I was just saying a moment ago. You claim you want to know God, then you must be able to search until the point of indeed encountering God himself. That's what's being said here. That's what's being said. And it's, again, a more crucial comment than many of us can understand. Because, again, as I've explained many, many, many times, again and again and again, there are so many people who claim to be spiritual seekers, but not everyone is seeking the same thing. Some people are actually seeking rampant materialism in the name of spirituality. Some people are seeking to just commune with the gods, in a very temporary sort of way. They want to themselves maybe become a god, to live for 100,000, a million years. Some people want mystic powers. Some people, indeed, it's more of an intellectual/philosophical curiosity. They want, quote-unquote, wisdom, but they don't then want anything that is attendant to that wisdom, etc. So people are all seeking different things, but then a certain number of individuals who are spiritual seekers are really seeking the highest. That is who Vishnu is speaking about here. So what he's saying is, it's actually, again, a simpler, yet interestingly, much more profound statement than many of us understand. He's saying, that person who is searching after God, you're searching after God? Then indeed, continue to search up until that. In other words, don't settle for anything less. This is what Lord Vishnu is saying. Do not settle for anything less. You're searching for God? Search for God. And be willing to go to the furthest extent necessary to come to the point where indeed God truly is revealed to you. And now, he goes on. That search, yes, you must do this search in all circumstances. In all circumstances. In other words, wherever you find yourself. No excuses. Very simply. No excuses. You're extremely wealthy. You're worth $9 billion. You're extremely poor. You don't know where next month's rent is coming. Whatever the circumstance, you're born in a very wealthy, advanced, industrialized nation. You are in a poorer nation, a third world country, etc., etc. Whatever the circumstance is, you want to know God, then search for God and nothing less, and with no excuses. And now let's go on. In all space and time. In all space. So again, wherever geographically you find yourself, it doesn't matter. God is there. You see how this proceeds from what we learned earlier in these earlier verses. God is there. God is in the most beautiful, pristine forests imaginable. And God is in your mud hut as well, as you're living there in poverty. God is everywhere. That being the case, again, in all space, wherever you find yourself, and time. So, how old are you? See, a lot of people, sadly, and I see this is the case, sadly, with the Hindu community, more than anyone. A lot of people have this very sad idea that, you should wait until you're extremely elderly and you've done everything, squeezed out every enjoyment that you can from this world. And only when you're extremely elderly, then you look for God. Well, no, that goes against every single thing that the Vedic scriptures say, including the teachings of many, many, many Vedic sages, many Vedic rishis, including Prahlad, who was 5 years old, and who taught his schoolmates who were his own age that no, now is the time to search for God. So thus, in all space and time, wherever you find yourself and whenever you find yourself, are you 5 years old? Are you 15? Are you 20 years old? Are you 40? Are you 70? Are you 90? Whatever the time is, now is the time to search for God, and to search for God in a fully unadulterated sort of way with complete sincerity. And then finally, and both directly and indirectly. Now, this is a very interesting clause. Only individuals who have been on the path for quite some time can fully understand what this is meant. But there's no real mystery about it. You search for God both directly, i.e., in doing actual sadhana, in actually reading the Vedic scriptures. In other words, in the most obvious of ways in which you search for God, so that is directly, you search for God in that way, but also indirectly. What is meant by that? Even when at that specific moment you are not necessarily steeped in meditation, but you're doing something else, you're working, you're at school, you're cooking something, you're taking a walk in nature, etc., you seek God then also, indirectly. Indirectly. You're not necessarily overtly doing meditation or puja. Obviously, if you're at your desk at work, or you've got your hammer and you're at work, or you're taking a walk in nature, you're not necessarily doing a puja or something like that, but indirectly you can still search for God. You can still breathe and see those traces of the divine there behind all things, behind the facade of all things within this world. Because again, God is present everywhere. That being the case, does God cease to be with us when we're at our desk at the job? Again, when we have our hammer and we're at a construction site, does God cease to be with us? Does God cease to be with us as we're chopping carrots, as we're cooking a meal, as we're eating? No, God is always with us. So even indirectly, we search for God, we feel God, we think of God. Both directly as we're doing actual sadhana, but again, even as we are engaging in the day-to-day activities of this world, we are searching for God, we are seeking God, and we are experiencing God at all times. So thus, now, having seen this natural philosophical flow of these 4 verses, we understand why this is called the Chatur-Shloki-Bhagavata, the 4 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam that form the very essence of the Vedantic teachings and purport of the Srimad Bhagavatam. These 4 verses are beautiful, but more, they are so filled with Vedantic truth that, again, I almost feel like I'm doing an injustice speaking about these verses for only about 45 minutes or so. We easily can spend 5 hours talking about each of these verses. So 20 hours total. We easily could do that. That's how important and how wonderful these verses are in revealing to us what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of God, what is the nature of ourselves within the material world, and what is the nature of the material world around us as well. So indeed, 4 very, very important verses. So these verses are contained in the description of this video. When you have time, look at them again after this is over and meditate on these verses, contemplate these verses if you wish to know what is the nature of the absolute, what is the ultimate nature of the absolute. So with that, I thank you very much for listening to this discourse, and now it will be my pleasure to answer a few questions. So I'll give people a little bit of time, a few seconds, to begin asking your questions. And with that, as soon as I begin to see your questions, it will be my pleasure to answer them. As I always have to say, I'm not going to be able to answer all questions just due to time. Good. Here's a very, very nice question from Cosmic Tone. Namaste, Acharyaji. In the same way that you once described a nation being subjected to karma, is it possible for a family to share a collected karma? Yes and no. And let me explain what I mean by yes and no. I have to answer in that way, but I will unpack it and hopefully give you a very satisfactory answer. And this goes for nations as well. This goes for any group of individuals who find themselves in the same place and time, and thus undergoing the same experience. Now, on the one hand, indeed, there is an idea of groupings of people experiencing a similar or even shared sort of karma on the one hand. On the other hand, actual collective karma in the New Age sense of this term, i.e., all these individuals being diverse individuals, nonetheless, they're all going to share the exact same karma. No, that's not the case. They all have a similar karma in accordance with who they are as individuals. And again, they all find themselves in that specific place and time in such a way that they are experiencing their own individual karma. Karma ultimately is individual. However, how it's experienced, you could be experiencing your karma with someone else who has the same karma because of something they did in a previous life. So does this make sense? On the one hand, there can be karma in which several individuals, however many it is, can be experiencing a similar sort of karma, but ultimately the cause of that karma was individual. So, to give let's say a terrible example, using negative karma. So I and 100 people are all in this one area, and a massive earthquake hits, and we all die at the same time in the same way. Now, on the one hand, that was my karma because I, as an individual, did something negative at some point in the past to warrant this reaction. And this is true for each individual who is there with me, those 100 people, on the one hand. On the other hand, yes, it is indeed true that we all suffered our individual karmas, which were extremely similar, in the same place, in the same time. So thus making it seem like there was some sort of truly, truly, truly deep connection, when in actuality the karma ultimately is an individual thing that is experienced by the individual. So now with that understanding, this is how indeed there can be a family karma, there can even be a national karma. Okay, so I hope that explains. There's a lot more I can say about this, and truthfully, as I'm answering, I almost feel bad because there's a lot more I can say about that to go much, much, much deeper, but let's start with that as a beginning. We only have about 9 minutes, and just to be fair, I want to answer other people's questions as well, but I hope that answers the question. Very good. I think I understand this question, and if I do, it's a quite good question. So I will answer this, and this is Voden's Reign. Sri Acharyaji, does the Vedic literature explain why or for what purpose God creates individual souls with their own will? And then is there any function that souls perform which is desirable to God? Very good. All right, this is two questions, and I'll begin by answering the first one. Does the Vedic literature explain why and for what purpose God creates individual souls with their own will? Indeed, without will, a soul would not be a soul. You see, part of what it means to be indeed a sentient being, to be consciousness, to be a personality, is that there are several elements that must be present. And a few of the more important ones include self-awareness, awareness of other, and free will. And there are a few others, but I'll just stick with those for now. If a soul does not have free will, it is then by definition insentient. It is an automaton. It is a thing rather than a person. So it's not merely a matter of, oh, good, could God, this is where unfortunately spirituality starts to venture into the realm of fantasy. Oh, could God create souls that do not have free will? If they did not have free will, they wouldn't be souls. If they didn't have free will, and sorry, I always use the same example. I have only so many insentient things on my desk here. If they did not have free will, they would be this: a thing, a thing, a thing. By definition, a living being, a soul, a being who has any sort of eternal worth to its name necessarily has free will. So it's not even a matter of God creating souls without free will. That's a non sequitur. That is something that would be an absurdity. To have a soul without free will, by definition, if it didn't have free will, it would be a soul. That's the more philosophical explanation. The simpler explanation is that, well, God has free will. That being the case, we also, being reflections of God, we also have free will. So that answers the first question, I hope. And then secondly, is there any function that souls perform which is desirable to God? Yes, yes, yes. Love. Love. Love is at the very essence of what it means, again, to be a conscious entity, to be a living being, a living entity, to be a soul, to be an Atman, is that we exist in order to love. We exist in order to love God, to love each other, and to receive love as well. This is the very essence of what it means to be an Atman. This is why when you calm the mind, when you listen to the breath, and when you contemplate the totality of existence within this world, and then by extension beyond this world, what you see is that indeed it is the pursuit of pure and perfect love that is at the very center of all things, at the center of all poetry, at the center of all even material acquisition. Why do people do things? They're searching for love. They're searching for real love. Sadly, they're searching for that love in illusion. Thus, they think love is lust. They think love is sex. They think love is conquest. They think love is control over the other, etc., etc. This is illusion. But in reality, every person is searching for love. Love is at the center of what we wish, of what we desire. Again, most of us don't know what that means, but we're searching for it nonetheless. The reason why this is the case, that love is at the center of all activities within this world, is because we are made to love. We are born to love and to receive love. So this is the function of the soul, and that is what is desirable to God. Please give me a few moments as I look at more of these questions. We only have a few minutes left, so I won't be able to answer every question, but I will try to answer some especially good ones. Very good. All right, here's a nice technical, very practical question from Vedic Heartland. Namaskar Acharyaji. I was speaking to a Gaudiya friend of mine. He says we are supposed to offer our japa to our guru if we have one. and our guru offers it to God. Is this an accurate practice? Yes, it is, with a little bit of caveat. When you say Gaudiya, of course, I don't know what organization or movement you're speaking of specifically. The two main branches, of course, being ISKCON and then Gaudiya Mutt. These are two these are two different branches, and they're not the only ones, but the two that are most prevalent, certainly in the Western world, but also in India as well. And they do things quite differently when it comes to japa beads. So ISKCON, for example, and it was Prabhupada himself who encouraged this. Nothing bad about it, but it's not orthodox. ISKCON gives out japa beads like they're giving out cheap candy. They just give them to everyone. A person walks into a temple for the first time, they haven't even stopped eating meat, they have never heard the Bhagavad Gita before. Oh, here, take some japa and chant Hare Krishna. That's what ISKCON does. The Gaudiya Mutt, on the other hand, they are a little bit more orthodox, and this is what my guru, B.R. Sridhar Maharaj, was like. It was the understanding that indeed the guru must give you the japa beads. You don't really even use japa beads until you are initiated by the guru. If you are using them because you were just innocent, you didn't know anything, that's fine. But really, technically speaking, the way that you receive your actual japa beads is that the guru will have the japa beads. You can supply the japa beads to the guru, that's fine, but they have to be beads that you've never chanted on, that no one has chanted on. The guru must be the first person, or the guru himself may have beads, and he'll do this. But indeed, the guru indeed does offer the beads themselves to God, and then the guru recites the mantra himself on the beads, on the totality of the beads. And then in initiation, he gives those beads to you. So those of my students who I've given initiation to, they've seen that that's how I do things. First, the beads themselves. Sometimes they're present, sometimes not. Sometimes I do it before they even arrive at the temple, but often they are here to witness it. I will offer the beads to the murtis, to Srimad Narayana. So quite literally, I offer the beads, but then also I recite the names of God on the beads, and I may do that in their presence. If it's going to be a big initiation, many students, just to save a little time, I will do it beforehand. But the point is, the guru recites the mantra on the beads, then the guru gives the beads to the shishya, to the disciple, to do his meditation. So that's the process, and this latter way that I've described is the orthodox process. Again, beads should not just be given out willy-nilly. Again, it's understandable why ISKCON did this. It was a form of preaching. It was just to encourage people who had no experience of using japa to get accustomed to it. But it's not 1966 anymore. We're living in a much more sophisticated world where indeed Vaishnava Dharma in its full form really has been here in America for the last over 50 years. So at this point in time, we should do things in a very orthodox sort of way, very authentic Vedic sort of way. So I hope that answers the question. And it's exactly 8 o'clock my time. So I'm going to maybe try to answer one more question. Let me say two more questions, because I just saw this question. This I can answer in one sentence, and it's a nice question. Rubu asks, how many people are in Vaikuntha? An infinite number. An infinite number of beings are inhabiting Vaikuntha. An infinite number. So that's the answer to that. Very good. Here's kind of a personal question, actually, and maybe I'll end with this. And this is from Yagya, and it is, Namaste Acharyaji. I am a New Yorker. I would like to ask you if you would advise visiting the temple you first visited in Queens. Very nice question. Very good. Well, thank you for asking that. And just as a little bit of background for people who may or may not know my own story, the first Vedic temple, Hindu temple that I ever visited was when I was approximately 14 years old, and I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and this was the Ganapati temple, in Queens, New York, and specifically it was on Bond Street in the Flushing area of Queens. And this temple is still there. This temple is the first Hindu temple ever built. I mean, built from the ground up in all of North America. So it's the first temple ever in North America. There were buildings that served as Hindu temples previous to that, but these were buildings that were converted churches or something else. This is the first Hindu temple that literally they just demolished whatever was there, and they just built from the ground up a beautiful Vedic temple. And this was the first temple that I visited. And to answer your question, oh, absolutely, you should definitely go visit there if you have an opportunity. It's a beautiful place. Since I was a youth, they have expanded it tremendously. It's at least twice, maybe 3 times the size from when I first visited there when I was 14. It's a beautiful place. I certainly would go there, and just go, of course, very respectfully. It's Hindu temples, Vedic temples are not tourist areas. They're not places for cultural exploration. These are houses of worship. Just like if you were to go into a mosque, you're not going to go there and be disrespectful. You don't want to try that. The same for many houses of worship. Well, this is true for Hindu temples, Vedic temples as well. You want to go, you want to be very respectful. And yes, you will see that it is a Hindu temple. So the main murti there is Ganapati, but they also have a murti of Krishna. They also have many other murtis as well. But you'll also see they have a murti of Sri Venkateshwara. When you see that smaller murti off to the side, beautiful murti of Sri Venkateshwara, that is the murti. Venkateshwara is a form of Vishnu. That is the first murti, the first form of Vishnu who when I entered that temple, surrendered my life to. I sat there at the age of 14, the very first day that I went to that temple, and I sat before that murti, who, if you go there, you'll see him, of Sri Venkateshwara, also known as Balaji. And I sat there in meditation, and in meditation, I prayed to Lord Venkateshwara, to Lord Vishnu, and I said, I understand, I know that you are God, that you are the source of all, and I surrender my life unto you. And from here on, everything that I am is yours and yours alone. And I was 14 when I did that. When you go to this temple, please go before Venkateshwara and offer him my obeisances as well when you are there for me. I would appreciate that very, very much. So with that, again, I apologize for not being able to answer everyone's questions, but we are out of time. Please, if you can, join us again next week, next Monday. And next Monday, I'm not going to give anything away, but we're going to be discussing another verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, a long verse that is very, very important in a very practical sort of way. And it's a message that everyone needs to hear. And again, I'm not going to give it away. A few days before, as always, we'll begin to announce the live stream, and you'll see what it is then. But if you can, please be here next Monday at 7 p.m. Central Time. And in the meantime, when you have a chance, please visit dharmacentral.com, which is our main website. You'll see many things there, including our books that are truly amazing works that will give you a very in-depth knowledge about this path like no other books can. You will see that we have much more information about Sanatana Dharma on there. So with that, I again thank you for being here. Namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharmarashtra Jayate. Suravangsha Jayate. Om Hri Om. And with that, everyone, until the next time that we get together, I ask you all to please take very, very good care of yourselves in every way. Be happy in every way. And please continue to explore this rich and profound and joyous path of Sanatana Dharma as much as you can. Take care.